Hello, I'm Mark Staples, and I'm the moderator for a series of legislative candidate interviews of those contesting to go to the Montana legislature in January of '09 and represent Missoula. And our sponsors for this program are Bresnan Communications, the Montana Cable Telecommunications Association, and your local community access channel, MCAT. And my guests for this portion are the candidates for House District 99 here in Missoula. On my right, the Democratic primary winner and nominee, Betsy Hands. And on my left, the Republican nominee and primary winner, Jed Cox. And just by alphabetical order, no preference whatsoever, I'm going to ask you, Jed, to go ahead and introduce yourself to your Missoula constituents and viewers, and give some of your personal and professional background.
Okay. My name is Jed Cox. I'm running for House District 99. I'm a recent U of M graduate with a BS in Business Administration. I've been for 3 years on the Officer of the Commissioner of Higher Ed, General Education Committee, and for the past 3 years I've also been a member on the board for ASUM, the student government for the University of Montana.
Betsy?
Hi, my name is Betsy Hands, and I currently serve as a representative for House District 99. And at the same time, I'm also the executive director for an organization called Homeward, and we're an affordable housing development organization, and we also provide homebuyer education and financial education. I've served in the Peace Corps. My undergraduate degree was from University of Montana, and I focused on sustainable development. So I spent quite a bit of time in West Africa. And when I decided to come back and settle in Missoula, I went back and got my master's in environmental studies. And my focus from then on has been in community development and really looking at the forces behind real estate development, affordable housing, and smart growth for development around our urban area. And I guess lastly, I would say I've also worked in outdoor education, and I spent some time as a substitute teacher in the Missoula County Public Schools. So that's a little bit about myself.
With the real estate development as background and sustainable environments, and maybe that's a nice segue into the current irony of the national real estate meltdown versus the reports in Montana that things are remaining fairly stable, both in the lending community and the investment community. Real estate slowed down a little bit, but it seems like we haven't taken the brunt of this. As a legislator, if you're returned to Helena in January, what's your assessment of the Montana economy in general, and does it need, what does it need to sustain it if it's acceptable to you, or what does it need to stimulate it if you need it to be better?
Well, it's a great question. Of course, I've been paying attention to real estate and have seen this coming for a while. And one of the things I believe really strongly in is better education, both for K through 12, as well as looking at things like how to invest in our higher education and our technical colleges. And I see that connected to people's abilities to then have the skills to make the right decisions in their lives, seek out the job opportunities they want, and be able to really stay financially healthy. I really believe that education is the cornerstone. In terms of how Montana has to kind of stay ahead of the economic downturn as we see it happening on the national place, one of the great things I've learned is that our local banks have been insulated from it because they did not invest in all those subprime mortgages. So there's a lot to go out and work with those local banks around loans and investment in our own community development. And I think it really points to the whole point around sustainable development is to look at local solutions and local resources for building a stronger economy. And so I see that in my work that I do at Homeward. With the projects that we develop, we always work with the local businesses and consultants when we look at design and work on actual construction projects, bringing in and maintaining those dollars in Missoula and in Billings and other places that we work. One thing that I want to add on to that, and then I will let Jed respond as well, is that a piece that's really important in sustainable development is understanding the long-term investment in energy efficiency and conservation, and that does pay off as a great investment for our state.
Jed, the economy.
Economy of Montana. I think right now the economy of Montana is doing fairly well. I think we could definitely see room for improvement, especially in the area of just raw industry, such as coal and oil and the other raw resource gathering. The big thing that we have right now is getting what we have in Montana out of Montana, trying just to get even the trains to stop to pick up the goods that we do produce here and try to take them out of the state has been a large problem for Montana. And of course, to export the oil and excess energy that we do produce in Montana to the other places that need them outside of our state. I think that's the big thing where we need to look at is, of course, developing the base, the structure of our economy to make sure that is more sound. Right now, we need to look forward towards education, of course, because that's the future, and that will be the better, higher paying jobs in the future for Montana, and especially the Missoula area. But we also need to have a solid economy that has the foundation of just the resource industry and agriculture, and of course, the development sector also. So,
Speaking of the economy, as of yesterday, I was in Helena, and the Revenue and Transportation Interim Committee heard a report that the estimate, projection for a surplus going into the session may be between $300 and $400 million. Now, we can't tell if that's going to be there, but for the sake of this discussion, let us presume that when one of you goes to Helena, there is $300 or $400 million in the state kitty. Do you have any priorities for spending, rebating, investments, trust accounts, whatever? I mean, that will be the money there is to work with per se. And what would you propose to do with it, Jed?
The thing I would prefer to do would be invest in higher education. The cost of higher education has increased steadily in our state. There was a temporary cap on the increase in tuition, but still, of course, costs increase because there's also many fees attributed to going to the universities. So I would say we need to spend more money on our education and get more educated young people in Montana. And then we need to lower taxes because we have a surplus, then we are overtaxing the people of Montana.
Betsy?
Well, I guess I'd say that that's not much of a surplus, and in fact, if you look at the past session and what we discussed, giving a rebate back to taxpayers was a really good way to go because it allowed for us to be able to handle a downturn in the economy when you might see less as the investments people are having problems with their investments, they're going to have less tax to pay in terms of the dividend taxes. But really, one of the things that I learned in the last session as well is that when you're looking at the budget, you have present law adjustments. And so you actually have to maintain, and we have to really balance the budget. It's part of our Constitution. You can't leave the legislative session without balancing the budget. We have to be able to maintain the services that we have and really look carefully at that. But if I could increase, if there were any left over after we divide that up for cost inflation and cost of living because of those present law adjustments, I would invest in K through 12 and higher education. I think it's really important that we continue to put money back into our education system. It was taken out over several administrations back, and it's really disabled the ability for our education to become prepared for the future around innovation and getting our school kids to be able to compete on the global market. The other place that I think is really exciting for Montana, and we're already moving in that direction, especially with the College of Technology here and other programs, is to look at energy efficiency, renewable energy, alternative energy options. How do we connect our schools to educating the workforce so that we can have green-collar jobs in our state that will compete again on the global market and ensure that we are not dependent on fossil fuels and fossil fuels from foreign countries?
I'll follow right up with you, Betsy, on school funding. If you've been there, we've been to Helena for one session. Obviously, it was a subject matter I've been around Helena now for 30 years, and it's been a subject matter every session. And there is a debate whether we're adequately funding or we're inadequately funding, and to the point where it's in court again. And the plaintiffs have said that there's no way, despite the infusions of spending in the last 2 sessions, it's not enough, and it's deficient, and it's legally deficient. And to the point where they're saying that, at least one of their spokespersons, that if in fact it was up to snuff, it would be another $600 million per year on top of what I believe is the $500 million currently. If the legislature reaches the conclusion by consensus, which God love them if they could, or the court orders them to reach a consensus, and that consensus is more money. If the 400 isn't enough, where do we get it? Or do we, whatever infusion we give has to come out of whatever surplus we have? Would you be in favor of new tax revenues, new tax sources to do this if it's inadequate?
Well, I think it's a really tough question without having the numbers in front of me and being able to talk to other legislators as we look at the surplus and look at the entire budget and the different programs and services that we need for the state to function. And I think one of the toughest things I learned as a legislator is you go in there with all these ideals of what you want to see happen and how you want it to change, and it doesn't change quite as quickly as you want, and you really have to be able to balance multiple needs. So of course, in education, when your primary focus is education, you're going to say that that's where all the surplus is going to go. But we do have roads and infrastructure. I look at, since I understand community development and really understand sewer systems and roadways and bridges and how that affects the ability for economic development and economic success, I think it's a big question to ask without having the numbers before me. And the one thing I would say is that something I learned when I was in the Peace Corps, that the Africans always told me as we were working on projects. In French, they would say, petit à petit, l'oiseau fait son nid. And what that means is little by little, the bird makes its nest. And so if it took 8 years or more to bring that funding down to where it's at, it's going to take us multiple years to bring it back up to the level that it needs to be at. I am not in favor of lawsuits. I think it's really important to sit down at the table, have discussions, and get people to understand all of the pressures that we're under to make sure that the budget is balanced.
Jed?
Yeah. Education definitely is a big issue with our state, and of course, that's where about half your property tax money also goes. The big thing I feel that K through 12 is adequately funded, but where those funds are going is not being funded correctly. In this last legislative period, Office of Public Instruction went from 1 building to 5 buildings. And I feel that that's kind of wrong, because I feel that money should be going to the classroom and not to administration. The state of Montana has reduced the classroom number of students in K through 12 by half since the 80s. But yet we have more administration taking care of those fewer amount of students in the K through 12 system. If we want to look at where the money's going, I think then we'll find out why the money's not going to the classroom where it needs to be and where we're having the troubles, and see that it's in the administration and being kept in Helena instead of going to the local rural communities where it needs to go. The other part of that, of course, is just since there is enough money for K through 12, we are the 7th right now highest funded per student state in the United States. I mean, we're ranked number 7. That's something we should be proud of, but also be something we should be ashamed of that we're doing not as well as we should be doing with the amount of money we're funding our K through 12 system. The area where I see education needing help is just the higher ed, because of the rising costs of course, tuition and the higher cost of fees, and the continuous growth and change that's needed for new buildings and new programs.
I hear you both saying, I think, because I couldn't get you to say it, and in days of interviewing candidates of both parties and having interviewed both gubernatorial candidates in other situations, I don't think from any candidate at any level in Montana any support for new taxes that I've heard. and I could be just overlooking something, but I have not had one person tell me, and in years past I did hear that, and these people aren't paying their fair share, or this person isn't, or we need this, or we need to go here. And so I'm assuming there are not going to be, in most respects, calls for new taxes. An exception to that rule is the cities wanting to help, they say they need help in satisfying their obligations, both infrastructure-wise and for services, and all the responsibilities they have. They believe that they have not shared in the benefits of the surpluses that the state has received, and as the cities have grown, their funding sources have not grown. The legislature did pass some legislation that dealt with the ability to assess impact fees, I believe. But obviously the cities do not feel that that's enough, and reputable leaders such as your mayor are saying they need the ability to take to the voters of your community a local option sales tax option, where they could vote to impose upon themselves or certain businesses within the community local option taxes. Traditionally, those taxes, which they call luxury or tourist taxes, have landed on alcohol by the drink or by the sale item, meals, prepared meals in restaurants or delis, lodging, and most recreational type thing, the things most likely to be used by tourists. And resorts now, true resorts, Big Sky, West Yellowstone, Whitefish, have the ability to take those kinds of votes to the people. Some have passed, some haven't. Now they want to give the cities, any community in Montana, the right to take that to their voters. That's an issue you're going to face, which of you are elected. So I'd like to say what you think about it and where you would vote. And I suppose the people in Missoula would like to hear that as well. Jed?
I would vote against doing such a thing as doing a local tax. You have the right to do your own sales tax per city. If we were to do that, every city would add a sales tax. So Montana, the whole state of Montana, in a sense, would have a sales tax, but it'd be different, of course, per city. And that's not something that I would like to see, especially when the other taxes aren't going down, even though we're being taxed more than with a new sales tax. So the people on of course, the lower end of society, lowest income levels, would of course hit the most, of course, because they need everything that we need also, whether it be, clothes, food, and not just tourists go out and eat, also Montanans go out and eat at our local restaurants and travel and use our hotels also. So I'd be definitely against adding more tax to the current system.
Betsy?
Well, I have to agree. Jed's made some great points, and actually I'm not a big favor of sales tax. It's actually a very regressive tax system. It means the people that earn the least are taxed the most out of their whole income. I think that if you had a local option tax, one, it would have to be put out to the voters. And two, I think you really do have to figure out what is it that people that, if we're trying to get the tourist dollars, what is it that really tourists buy more frequently than the regular Western Montanans, Missoulians, and people that live around and outside Missoula. Because as somebody that travels around the state of Montana, I rent cars for my work, I stay in hotels, and that would end up being a tax on folks here. So I'm a little bit hesitant. The one thing I would say is I am a big favor of what Whitefish and Big Sky have been able to do with their local option tax. It has invested in the infrastructure of their towns. They have better streets and gutters and systems for people getting around. I also think there's other ways to get there. One thing that Bozeman's done well is they have a big box store tax. And I think that when you look at the demand that big box stores put on the infrastructure and people coming in along Reserve Street to use that commercial area, it makes sense to me that there are many services that are required of the local government for those big box stores that they need to be paid for through some sort of system for taxing that. So I don't know if that's some kind of local option tax that we could enable through the state legislature. I certainly recognize it because at Homeward, we actually have folks that work at, say, the Walmart but have to live in affordable housing, which is invested in by our local government, by the state government, to create affordable housing that's below the market rate rental. So when you see that impact and you know that it's costing our community, then we certainly deserve the right to be able to pay ourselves back for it.
Jed, I'm going to give you a chance to close briefly. Anything in particular you want to take to Helena, and at the end of the day, via a ballot that could go out actually next week, somebody's going to have to check a box for you or Betsy. And so what in particular, if anything, are you taking to Helena in your briefcase in terms of ideas, and why you instead of Betsy for the voter?
Well, the one thing that I would really like to address if I were to go to Helena would be to look at the mandates on the insurance companies. Currently in Montana, there's 40 different mandates on the insurance companies, which means certain things like you can't differentiate between a man and a woman and when doing a policy for insurance and other policies like that. And adding these policies, and especially, certain ones in particular, help raise the cost of insurance. And by getting rid of a few of these, you can, of course, help lower the cost of health insurance, which is something that all Montanans need and I feel should have the right to buy if they can afford it. And that's a big thing we need to look at. Also, it'll help bring more companies into Montana because there'll be fewer restrictions upon their company, so you have more competition between different insurance companies from the national level, because Montana is such a small market compared to the national level. Many companies left the state when they started adding so many mandates. So it'd be great to have some of those companies come back in and start to offer their products again in Montana.
Betsy, the final word.
Well, having spent the last 6 years working in an organization that promotes sustainable development and understands the payback for putting in energy efficiency, building and construction, as well as using local materials and renewable energy systems, solar panels, I'm really excited about the future because I've been reading a lot about what's going on in terms of technology. We're bringing in a manufacturing plant to Butte to create wind generators. I think that Montana sits right at the edge of becoming a leader in the West and in the United States around energy development, and especially alternate and renewable energy. So one of the things that I believe is that if we can create an atmosphere that invites that to our state, and we can create ways to become more energy efficient, even in our schools. I was thinking about the question you asked earlier around what do we do if the schools have surplus. If we could just weatherize our schools and create energy efficient heating and cooling systems, not only would we reduce the costs that as we as homeowners are seeing are increasing utility bills, the schools are much larger. They have not only this giant school that they're heating and cooling and keeping lit, they also are driving their students back and forth to school in the buses. So I think we really have to look at, we can reduce our costs while also creating jobs and ensuring that we're competing again with what's going on in the country and around the world around energy innovation, creating green-collar jobs. And so I think there's a way for us to be smart about investing those dollars.
Well, I'd like to thank you both for taking the time. This isn't the bewitching hour. This isn't Miller time. This is actually in the middle of both of your working days, and I know it's a sacrifice to carve that time out from your positions, wherever they are, to come and join us and share your thoughts with the voters. Even more so every night when you knock on the doors and campaign. And then even more so if you're elected and go to Helena and have to take 4 months off and interim committees and work 12-hour days, 6 days a week. And so having watched how hard the legislature works, the myths about the party atmosphere is just that. It's very, very hard work for, as Montanans would call it, very short pay. And so from a personal level, I thank you for taking the time to serve your fellow citizens by seeking these jobs, and even more so if you're elected by doing it. And I would ask our viewers, who I thank for tuning in, to do yourself the favor and do these people the honor of voting in January. Thank you again for watching.